Hello everyone, welcome back for more conspiracy territory, so I hope you have your tinfoil hats with you. We are going to cover from video 105 to video 117 here. And I don't know if I mentioned it in previous videos. I don't think I did, and I probably should. If I don't mention where we are on the event timeline whenever I talk about a fade in and fade out, it's because it's not something that shows up specifically on the timeline, or it's a part of the timeline that we've covered multiple times in multiple stories. It's one of those things. So yeah, that when I don't mention a specific event timeline, when I don't mention a specific entry on the timeline, it's because there isn't one. For the most part. At least not one I could find. Anyway. And again, yes, I am alone for these. But let's get started, shall we? We are up to video 105, and we begin with Natsuno entering the girls' track and field room, where we see Ryoko crouched down behind one of the benches. Natsuno approaches her and expresses some surprise at seeing the second year, and asks if Ryoko needed something there. Ryoko just lets out a little humph and walks out of the room. Natsuno sees her open locker, closes it, then looks around for BJ, who pops out of a nearby laundry basket. Natsuno's relieved to see him and wonders if Natsuno's relieved to see him and wonders if Ryoko was looking for him. She asks him if he thinks she was working with the Men in Black, and he isn't quite sure of Ryoko's affiliation. However, he knows her intentions, to which Natsuno currently guesses that he means the logs, so he adds that future information and technology could also be the goal. She says people are starting to suspect her, so they need to find the Sentinels soon. She asks if it's on the UFO, but then asks if that was really just made in Japan too. BJ says it's the name of the control system. Natsuno asks where they can find it, and he replies the gate. Natsuno goes to get her bag, which she notes has been opened. She picks up the bag, stores BJ in it, and says if she sees that second year again, she'll just kind of sprint by. They leave to a fade out. We fade into the outside of the building, where Natsuno looks around, doesn't see anybody, and then runs off to Tokisaka Shrine. We fade out again. We fade into the shrine, where Natsuno runs on scene. She pulls BJ out of the bag, and he begins the gate activation process. He doesn't seem to be making any progress, and when Natsuno asks why, he says it's sealed off like Sector 5 is. Natsuno asks if that means they can't go, and he then finds an opening in Sector 3, so they might be able to go from there. Natsuno questions it, and he tells her Sector 3 is in 2025. She remarks that that's 40 years away, so she's kind of having mixed feelings about being somewhere where she's in her 50s. BJ begins a shift, they teleport, and the scene fades out. We fade into event 129 on the timeline, to that ruined building we've been pretty familiar with by now from Tomi's story, as BJ and Natsuno shift into it. She notes this place is kind of falling apart and must have gotten hit really hard. She sees a student ID on the ground and picks it up to find that it belongs to Ryoko Shinonome, Class 2A, and recognizes the picture as the girl she saw in the track room. She looks around the area, remarks that it looks like it's in ruins, but it almost seems like someone's been living there. She asks BJ if the UFO is close, and he says it's 1.7 kilometers away. He starts to head off, and she chides him about leaving her behind again. As they exit what passes for the door, they run into Ryoko pointing a phaser at them. She tells him to stop, and Natsuno calls her name out in surprise. Natsuno asks if she also time traveled, and she responds that she's been waiting because she knew they would be there, as this is 426's hideout, and accuses Natsuno of working with him. Natsuno has no idea what Ryoko is talking about and says she's never actually been there before. Ryoko tells her not to play dumb and says she'll deal with Natsuno later. And she will get Natsuno to tell her where 426 is. However, her mission now is to take the data unit back with her, so she should just hand it over. BJ interjects that Ryoko is being used. This is the reason they want her to find him, is to keep everyone from seeing the logs and uncovering the truth. She says she doesn't care about that, and he asks her if that applies to the logs between her and Tetsuya, which actually causes her to pause briefly. Natsuno steps forward and exclaims she's not letting Ryoko take BJ. BJ tells her to stop, and Ryoko tells her to get out of the way before shooting her, having BJ scream out Natsuno's name as she collapses. We fade out, and then fade back in to Natsuno recovering from the stun shot, but otherwise the street is empty. She remarks that it's kind of freezing as she comes to, stands up, and stretches. She looks around trying to remember where she is, and then that clicks. And when that clicks, she starts looking for BJ. She rifles through her bag to no avail, then runs around the immediate area yelling for BJ, and realizes that the way things look, they're not exactly good for her because she can't go home now. We fade out, to be continued. So let's see, we need a few strings here. Just a few. And I need to zoom in, highlight Ryoko, because they're all going to Ryoko here. I'm just going to attach all four of those to Ryoko to start with here. Let's see, first we learn Ryoko is definitely in Class 2A. Ryoko has been tasked with recovering the future communications logs. Let's see, Ryoko shoots and stuns Natsuno there. And she kidnaps BJ-11-5. We've learned that's not his name, but I'm still going to call him. We continue on with video 106. Once again, we start on the familiar rooftop with Yuki drinking the apple juice. She wonders where Aiba went, but realizes she needs to focus on finding Natsuno and wants to check in with A on the search progress. She leaves for the Class 1 hallway to a fade out. We fade into Yuki entering the hallway where she sees Megami and Juro, but doesn't have any relevant conversations with anyone. She muses about past incidents for a bit, then heads to the old school building to a fade out. We fade back in to Yuki entering that building as she runs in, calling out if anyone's there. She looks around inside of a couple of the classrooms and begins to think A got caught, but eventually finally spots BJ and A further down the hall. BJ calls out to her and she approaches, but A is seated on the floor holding his head. Yuki asks if he's okay, and BJ says the nanomachine separation in his brain is progressing. Yuki doesn't understand, and BJ explains that it's the same condition Ryoko has. He says he still has memory, but he ran out of his pills. He says don't bother with him, because they determined Natsuno's location in Sector 3. BJ says that this is only speculation, but the probability that she is there is high. Yuki is excited to go and get her right now, but before she bolts off, she checks on A. He says to go without him, as he only needs to relay information, and the black suits are only after him now, so she should avoid being seen with him to avoid them thinking she's his accomplice. Excuse me. He hands her a phaser, which she says she doesn't know how to use, but A says she will need it to save Natsuno. A asks for a favor that if he loses his memory, he wants her to have Miura/BJ show him a message BJ is carrying for him. She asks if he'll be okay by himself, and he says that's about all he can handle, but Ryoko's medicine is probably in the nurse's office. He points out that BJ is in a hurry and tells her to go with him. The pair leave towards Sector 3 to a fade out. Excuse me. Goodness, my throat doesn't want to talk right now for some reason. We fade into Event 147. We see Yuki and BJ exit the ruined building in Sector 3. She asks BJ where Natsuno is, and he replies that she is about 3.2 kilometers to the southeast, along with a concentration of androids. She gripes about it, and BJ says they must have found something, and Yuki assumes that something is Natsuno. BJ takes off in helicopter mode, telling her he has no attack capabilities, so it's all up to her. She looks at the phaser and says she knows. They head off to the site where Natsuno is, to a fade out. We fade in to event 148 in the timeline, and we are now 3.2 kilometers southeast, where multiple androids are stalking the area. The scene pans right to see Natsuno hiding in the shell of the kaiju we saw earlier in Tomi's chapters. Natsuno notes that they won't go into the shell after her, but if she takes a step outside, they attack, and they've been coming after her since she got there. She finished off the last of the food and drink she has, doesn't know what to do now, and wonders if she's about to die there. We hear gunfire, and the scene pans left to see when the androids fall over. Yuki rushes on screen and takes several shots at the androids. BJ tells her to aim for the battery, and she says that's what she's trying to do, as the last of the androids fall over. She gripes about not knowing how to use a gun, and BJ says she did well. Yuki runs to the right, sees Natsuno, and the two hug. Yuki reassures Natsuno that she's safe now, and Natsuno asks why she's there, and Yuki replies she'd come find her anywhere, even if she has to cross time and space to do it. BJ examines the shell and says the G-Molar's magnetic shield is still active, which is why the androids wouldn't approach. Natsuno is happy that BJ also came for her, and he says that of course he'd come, but small talk needs to wait till later as 4 androids are incoming. Yuki takes an aggressive stance as BJ enters hover mode again, and she says, "No matter what comes our way, I will protect you with everything I have." Natsuno giggles, and the three exit the scene to a fade out, and off to the final battle Yuki gets to go, signifying the end of her story. Let's see. You get a second card there. Something I probably should have made a card for a very long time ago, but I never did. Let's see. First, we learned that magnetic shields were important. Even if it is just a magnetic field, it works as a magnetic shield, apparently. First things first, these shields are really good at stopping androids. You there? Okay. I can actually see Yuki's card, and we had A. Give Yuki a phaser. There we go. 2 videos down. We move on to video 107, and we start at event 276 on the timeline. We begin Natsuno's final chapter at Sumire Bridge, where Natsuno, BJ, Yuki, and Keitaro enter. Natsuno says it looks like a good wide spot with no one else around, so the Sentinel popping up won't be a problem. Keitaro asks if she's going to summon it now, and maybe she should wait until nightfall. She says they're going to send it right back, and Yuki says it should be fine if it's only for a second. BJ says he wants to change the registered pilot of 17 to Natsuno, and Natsuno asks why her. He replies he was using Miura's ID, but the ownership of the ID returned to the other Keitaro, which Keitaro says is because he operated number 19, and BJ says he can no longer pilot a Sentinel, so in order to shift to the Sentinel it needs a new pilot. However, the process does reset the Sentinel's stored memory. Yuki and Natsuno ask what they can do, and BJ says they will transfer all data logs to him. If both actions are done at the same time, he should be able to secure the log data. He tells her that from now on, number 17 will be... But before he can finish, she interrupts by saying it's no problem, and she'll be the one that pilots a robot, and fight together with BJ. Yuki seems to accept this as long as Natsuno isn't in danger, and BJ replies number 17 will protect her. Yuki says she should be fighting instead, and he tells her there's already another Sentinel for her. Yuki asks him to repeat himself, but he only says they have to work together and survive. He repeats that both processes must be performed concurrently, and tells Natsuno that it's time to activate as he brings up his screens. Natsuno swipes her cheek, and number 17 appears as BJ appears to shut down. Yuki tells her to send it back, and she asks how, just before it disappears. The three stare for a moment before Natsuno turns and asks BJ if it worked, but BJ no longer responds. She kneels down next to BJ and asks him to say something, and Keitaro tells her that he's no longer with them. She asks for clarification, and Keitaro says BJ was the only one that could retrieve the log data, but the scout unit's storage capacity is kinda limited, which means he couldn't store both the logs and his own AI data. Thus, to make room for the logs, he deleted himself. Natsuno can't accept this and continues to try to get BJ to respond. We fade out, and Natsuno is ready for the final battle. The video gets to continue on, and we move on to see A on the nighttime street near Tsutsudi Station. He looks around, thinks he's lost them, but he needs to consider his next moves carefully. He walks over to the nearby payphone and dials the message service listed on the sheet he found much earlier while wondering who left a message for him. He finds that he has two new messages. The first message is from himself, and he says there are no outcomes where it ends well, so his advice is to stop living in the past, and he's responsible for his own future. The second message is also from himself, where he imagines he's confused by hearing the message and being unable to remember anything. He's entrusted a message to a good friend of theirs, and if he seeks the friend out, he'll literally find them with Natsuno. He says he's out of time, so above all else, finish the job for his sake. Message is over, A hangs up and wonders what all that means. He exits the booth and thinks that if it was true and he can believe it, Natsuno is a key figure that may get him closer to recovering his memories, so he better get his hands on the data unit and find out. For now, he'll investigate Minami on his own once he finds her. He then wonders how he should approach it and thinks Iori might be able to help find her, but he doesn't want to get her mixed up in all this. He then recalls that he saw Natsuno this morning and runs off to find her as the scene fades to black. We fade back in to event 277 in the timeline, to the outside of the track building, and A walks on screen. He says Iori's still waiting for him at the front gate, and he doesn't want anything to happen to her if things start to heat up. He walks over to the door to the girls' locker room, but is forced to hide when a man in black appears. He says Iori wasn't kidding that they were still all over campus, so he'd better stay out of sight, and this means he can't get to the track room right now. He looks around until he finds some other members of the track team and asks them where Natsuno is, and they tell him she went for a short run around the school but hasn't come back yet. As he turns to leave, he makes eye contact with Yuki, who then runs off. He recognizes her as the one that delivered the package with his message to him, and he gives chase to a fade to black. We fade in to one of the shortest things in the world, event 278 in the timeline. We fade in to see A follow her first to the passageway and then inside the old school building, and we fade to black. And that, in and of itself, earns a spot on the timeline. I'm not kidding. This is a thing that happened. But anyway, yep, that's video 107. So, there's not a whole lot to add to this, except you, BJ, registered the Sentinel to Natsuno, and that's kind of all we actually got out of there as far as information. We continue on with video 108 and event 279 in the timeline. A walks into the old school's main hallway and draws his gun on Natsuno when she approaches. Yuki runs in from behind to hit him and tell him to stay away from Natsuno. Natsuno tries to tell her to wait, but she's unwilling to wait for someone that pointed a gun at her. Natsuno tells them both to knock it off and they stand down. A looks at Yuki and tells her since she knows who he is, maybe she can explain what's going on. She remarks he forgot everything like Ryoko did, and then explains why she can't get a read on him, so she doesn't know whose side he's on right now. A looks to Natsuno and asks what they were planning on luring him into the building. She, confused, says she thought he came for BJ. She pulls BJ out of the bag, and A remarks that is what showed him footage of himself. Yuki steps up to correct him, telling him the earlier unit was specifically supplied by the SIU, and they had it say what he heard before. He questions the SIU, and she clarifies that's where the MIBs are from. He then asks who in the world she is and if she's working with them. She says she's Yuki Takamiya, and strictly speaking, no, she's not. He asks why she's cooperating with them, and she says they're keeping tabs on Natsuno, so she has no choice. A turns to look at BJ, and realizes the black suits wanted him to see the footage, so he kneels down next to BJ and says it's the data unit he was meant to seek out. Natsuno tells him there's a message that BJ asked Natsuno to show A, and they begin playback to show a window with A in it. He asks why he temporarily erased his memories and if it was because of A. BJ's voice is heard, telling A that he can't let them get their hands on that info. A talks about his partnership with Ida and dishonesty, and asked BJ if he knew all along. BJ tells him he might not realize this, but A is a terrible liar. A says he guesses so, and then asks why BJ didn't show him the data after it was analyzed, and if it was because BJ put pity on him, and BJ replies that some things are best left unknown. A disagrees, as he thinks he should know about his own past, no matter how terrible he was, and asks if BJ can link him to the logs through this message. BJ's hesitant, but A insists. A's window cuts out to be replaced by two others, one with 2188's version of A, and the other with 2188's version of Rinya Goto. A asks who the target is, and Rinya says that it's the leading nanotech researcher, Chihiro Morimura. A adds that she's a former executive of Newman Inc. Rinya says that after she left Newman, he allowed her to participate in Shikishima's project. The project was put on hold, but she hadn't stopped working on it, and the company is going to suffer massive losses. A tells him, well, that's not the real reason, and that he pushed for the acquisition of Newman Inc., and started a backdoor transfer of a very large slush fund. Rinya asks what he's basing that on, and A replies that the Interstellar Development Project was one of 12 showcased for the acquisition, but Rinya used that project to cover for the real use of funds. However, Chihiro's actions threw a wrench in those plans, as if an international agency were to catch wind of that, they'd definitely launch an investigation, which kind of endangers his position. Rinya asks if A is threatening him, and A tells him that he's an assassin, completely professional, and that he wouldn't waste his time with blackmail, but if he has to perform his job perfectly, he does have to gather every last detail on the target. Rinya tells him Sector 4 is a colony under construction, and that's where her lab is, while he'll be heading into orbit for next month for an inspection. He wants the job handled by then, discreetly, and has also sent over the security details for Sector 4 with the security ID for A's use. He repeats that A is to eliminate Chihiro Morimura and put an end to the project. Excuse me. A says he has to confirm receipt of payment, and the windows wink out of existence. Yuki walks forward and asks what all that was about, and remarks that he came from the future to kill the one teacher. But that can wait, because she really wants to know what he was doing with that four-eyed bastard. He spends a moment in his own head, realizing that he is an assassin, and he may very well have killed Morimura, and then wonders if he was going after Fuyusaka next. He also realizes he's been lying to Miura, but he can't quite figure out about what. A struggles to put the pieces together as the scene fades to black. We fade back into event 41 in the timeline and the ruined street of 2025. We see an adult Tetsuya Ida and A walk on screen with a drone flying overhead and BJ in a box form in the ground. A snarks at Ida about finding him with the drone, which Tetsuya said was just a coincidence, and both of them are considered deceased now. He says he's been in hiding since the battle in Sector 2, but he figured A would keep himself out of trouble. A asks to use DD-426 back in the battle, and Ida says someone did his research, but A's Sentinel was the source of the infection, so the evidence suggests that A was the one that used it. A agrees that's how it looks, and Ida says he doesn't know who the real culprit is, but Chihiro enacted Operation Aegis after they lost. A asks exactly what Operation Aegis is and what the hell happened to the area they're in. Ida tells him that Sector 3 was a trial run, and that was the only terminal tested on, but that was enough to activate the self-defense system, so Sector 4 is going to be the real deal. A clarifies that that's the 1980s, and Ida continues that once all the terminals are sealed by the self-defense system, Operation Aegis will be fulfilled, and if that happens, they'll no longer be able to loop, which they can't let happen. A asks how looping, or going back in time, is different than shifting. Ida says this world was only created 15 years ago, and A comes from a different world where it's 2064, and that never existed prior to 2049. A's confused and points out that if it's 2025 right now. Ida tells him that this is neither the past or the future, but just how the 5 sectors were designed and were created when he arrived from another world. A is fed up with all this and tells Ida to prove there is another world. Ida asks if A is aware of Miura's logs from 2188 and that he made an interesting discovery after studying the data himself, that the real world is in 2188 and that they were meant to return to it. However, the world they're in is destroyed before that time can come, which is tragic, especially if it were the result of someone's careless actions. Ida says the kaiju have the singular goal of gaining control of every mainframe in all sectors, and once they do, the sectors reset, which recreates the world, including A. He says he and Morimura didn't exactly go back in time, they just kinda skipped the recreation. A starts to suffer a headache, and Ida tells him he's looking kinda pale, so maybe he should take his pills. A downs a few, and Ida asks if he's delivered the pills to Morimura for Izumi and Ryoko, and rubs it in that the 3 of them have no hope of fully recovering, but there is a way for them to survive. A asks how, and Ida says he'll extract A's data from before he lost his memories and take it with him to the recreated world, which would stop the effects of DD-426. A wonders if he can really do that, and asks what Ida needs him for. Ida tells him that it's to make sure they can loop, but as he plans to stop Operation Aegis so they can start over again, and he'll need A's help to do it. He knows A isn't convinced, but will be once he sees the 2188 logs. So he asks A to go find Sentinel 17, as Ida knows he made a copy of it, and the data will be useful in the next world, so he needs it. Ida then points out the drone on the ground in box form. A kneels next to it, but Ida says don't activate it yet because it's not just a drone, it's him, meaning Miura, as he transferred himself into the drone and escaped where the Sentinels were force transmitted, but Ida secured him in Sector 2. However, he doesn't agree with Ida's methods, so he isn't cooperating, and he wants A to pretend to have saved BJ from Ida and try to get the data from him. He then adds that BJ received command number 17 instead of him, and he isn't sure why, but that means only BJ can track and activate the Sentinel. He prods A to cooperate for his own sake, and he'll make sure Miura comes with him, but above all, this is for him and Ryoko. Ida tells A that structural damage makes the gated school non-functional, so he can set new coordinates further ahead, so please feel free to use that one. In the meantime, Ida will keep the MIBs following A to avoid suspicion, but they won't be aware of the plans and tells A to try not to get caught. Tetsuya heads back to Sector 4 and A activates BJ. They greet each other as the scene fades out with a to be continued. Okay. So we're going to need a new green, a new yellow card here. Because we have a not BJ drone that was involved in a whole lot of stuff. And then we finally get eyes on a Sekigahara in the 2188 era. Let's see. That should be all the strings I need, but we will see. Okay, let's see. So now let's see if I can find all these. Yeah, there you are. The SIU here. Took one of these and supplied it to Yuki there. To which Yuki gave it to A on orders. The SIU used the thing to give A false information. Yeah, Rinya Goto of the future here. Hired Sekigahara to kill Chihiro Morimura. And we have future Chihiro Morimura was former executive, should be right around there, of Newman Inc. Also, Morimura and Rinya from 2188 area. There's quite a bit going on between those two of them. More than just one string can actually convey. And it turns out Rinya over here bought Newman Incorporated as mostly a smokescreen for starting slush funds and such. And one of the parts of that was the whole interstellar development project that he specifically used as smoke screens. Let's see. The adult version of Tetsuya Ida managed to grab a BJ-11-5 here in Sector 2. Well, A apparently very badly attempts to lie to the same BJ unit there. Is that everything? I think that's everything for this video. We continue on with video 109. Shu's next chapter begins as he walks along the third floor hallway. He yawns and says he's off his game due to all the weird dreams lately, combined with the weird show in the middle of the night. He remarks that in the dream he called himself Tetsuya Ida, but as that isn't his name, he doesn't know what to make of it. And another dream surprised him as Tomi turned up in the lab. He looks in class 1B, sees Tomi, and wonders why he's suddenly self-conscious, as it was just kind of a dream and nothing to do with actual feelings. But if he bumps into her, things could get awkward, so he decides he needs to go somewhere, grab a cold drink, sit down, and just chill out. After deciding that the sugar boost is also in order, he leaves the hallway to head off to the vending machines with a fade out. We fade back in to see Shu at the break area with Okino standing in front of one of the machines. He ignores Okino to head to the drink box machine, selects a hazy apple juice, remarking that it's Yuki's favorite, so he can't go wrong. He drinks the drink and then stops to think about the situation, and realizes that it probably only ends up with him telling someone and ending up in a psych ward, so what can he actually do about it? As he ponders, Juro runs into him and asks to hang out. Shu says sure and asks to go back to Juro's place, as Juro should be alone and wants to check the house out. Juro says that while his grandma's away visiting relatives, he has a guest there and it's a little awkward, so it's not really a good time. Shu capitulates and agrees to go to his place instead. They leave the break area to another fade out. We fade in to event 202 in the timeline, and Shu entering his room with a can in hand. He approaches Juro, who is watching a video game on TV briefly before turning it off. Shu asks if he's done already and apologizes for only having soda to drink. He hands it to Juro, who drinks it, and then Shu walks over to the window and remarks on how it's getting dark. Juro finishes the drink, and Shu says they should probably go get dinner and offers to treat Juro. Juro feels bad that Shu paid for his ramen last time, and Shu asks if he wants to call it a day. Juro says he can still go, he'll just pay for his own food. Juro kneels down by the TV and asks Shu if he watched the video he lent to him. Shu says that since Juro recommended he had to, and Juro asks for his opinion. Shu called it campy, about a mad scientist who loses his real body, so he builds a new body and sets out on revenge. Interesting, but not exactly for casuals. Juro says it just proves it's a masterpiece of a B-movie. Juro goes to look at Shu's records, and Shu sees Miyuki Inaba pop up on TV, which he quickly turns off. Juro is surprised to learn that Shu likes J-pop in addition to Western music, specifically Miyuki Inaba, as she's been getting big lately, and Shu says he just got curious. Shu thinks about finding a way to tell Juro about what's going on, as he might be able to believe it, but Shu knows he has to be very, very careful about how he brings it up so as to prevent looking like a crazy fanboy, and opts to keep his mouth shut for the moment. Shu restates that he's getting hungry, so he asks Juro if he wants to go grab dinner and go home, and Juro asks if he could stay a little bit longer. Shu says his old man is probably at his mistress's place, so he's all alone there, so Juro's welcome to stay as long as he wants. He asks Juro if there's a reason he doesn't want to go home, but doesn't really push, and brings up getting food again, with an offer to swing by the video store. This reminds Juro to pull out a tape and said it's a sequel to another sci-fi one, that the story was meant for Shu, and then it adds that it was really meant for both of them. We fade to black in the middle of the chapter as the video ends. We continue on with video 110 as my throat decides it really wants to stay all gunked up for the time being, and I can't clear it out. We fade into event 22 in the timeline. We see Tetsuya Ida in the number 6 lab typing away on a computer. The torso and head of a skeletal android are trussed up next to him, and he says memory transfer complete. He steps over to a different monitor and tells Juro to open his eyes, or does he prefer the name 426? The android flickers to life, and Juro recognizes Ida. He remarks that Ida looks older, so he's been gone a while. Ida says Juro always notices that when Ida wakes him up, and tells him it's been 3 years since Juro's death, and that next year is the 22nd century. Juro wonders how he looks, and says that the sight is horrific with no arms, legs, or face. Ida tells him that the pain receptors are still there at least, so he kinda recommends cooperation. Ida tells him he's an android, and his consciousness is stored in the electronic brain. Juro asks if he brought the data back from Sector 0 to bring him back as a ghost, and Ida said it was because they needed to talk. He says Juro clearly did the most work on the underground supercomputer, so they're going to talk about his research. To start, he wants to know about the final project, a function from the interlocutor which was downloading memories into a human brain. Ida says he's picking up what Juro left off, so he needs details, because records indicate that the experiment was a success, but the raw data from it was deleted. He asks Juro why he deleted it, and Juro remains silent, even after Ida suggests he get a snag with the method. Ida loses patience and tells him he needs a wake-up call if he's still groggy, turning on the pain transmitters until Juro says the method was viable and it's possible to download a memory, but asks why that info matters to Ida, and if he's planning to take over someone's body. Ida says that he killed Tomi, so he's going to make Juro pay. He's planning on bringing her back as a human. Juro says it's incredible and asks how many times Ida has revived him here, because he's not the first or second. Ida curses him and says only Juro could find the one gap in the system's security. Juro remarks that they've been doing this for a long time, even getting Juro to reveal how to interrupt the D-Force production, so it must have been painful to get that one, because handling the Deimos code is dangerous. Ida asked him how far back he looked, and he says he needs to keep a better eye on him. Juro calls him out for the process of copying him into the android and then deleting him once he needs. Ida says he's dangerous, so he better get rid of him early this time because he can't afford the risk. At that point in time, android Tomi walks into the lab. She tells Ida she found out from Chihiro that he's planning to transplant her mind to replace the Tomi of this world with her. She asks him if she realizes how horrifying that is, and he protests that it means she can be human again, and she counters that it means he's sacrificing a living human girl. He protests again that it's her heart and mind going into her own body, and what's wrong with that? She tells him that he has to know she's dead, that the Tomi he's talking to is just a machine wearing Tomi's face. He says her heart's real, it's still her, and she says that he doesn't get it, that the girl he knew will never come back, even if Ida steals her body and transfers her mind. He starts to beg, and she says she loves him, but she can't support him or this. Juro finally interrupts to say he understands why Ida woke him up, but it sounds like things aren't going according to plan. Tomi asks who that is, but before Ida can say anything, Juro says he knows what Ida's biggest failure was, and that it's he shouldn't have revived her as an android in the first place. If he just transplanted her mind into a flesh body, he'd have gotten everything he wanted with no one the wiser. Ida snaps back at him to shut up, and Tomi finally recognizes Juro and demands that Ida tell her why he woke Juro up. Juro says it was the same reason he brought Tomi back, to be his means to an end, just tools to be used and thrown away. Ida tells Tomi he brought him back just to check some technical things and he'll erase him as soon as he's done. Ida turns to Juro and says he has more questions, but he'll ask those another time. Juro says that he sees Ida kept Tomi's memory from just before transplanting her into an android, and has the paranoia is getting to him to make him keep that many backups, and it's a strange move for a man that sees humans as replaceable hardware, unless he just had the same contingency plan for her to keep erasing her and starting over as much as he wanted. Ida snarls at Juro, and Juro digs at him a little more by reminding him that both he and Tomi are just data that just needs to be reset so it can spring to life. Ida turns to Tomi and says he's erasing Juro and asks her to keep an eye on the console. Juro tells her to watch carefully because you never know what might happen. Ida finishes inputting the commands in, and the Juro android powers down. Ida says the erasure is done and asks Tomi if she realizes he was just messing with their heads, and then asks if she's mad at him. She remains silent as he walks out of the room. Once he's gone, Tomi turns around and says data transmission was remapped to the delete button, but Ida was too worked up to notice. Juro now in Tomi's body, and he says he never thought he'd find an escape route planned out for him by one of his past selves at that. He asks the android how she's doing as he powers her on, and she takes a second to come to. He asks her how the view is on the other side of the shell, and it's a shame it might get her deleted by the man she loves, which would be a classical tragedy. He says he needs the body more than she does, and he walks out of the room with a fade to black. We fade back in to event 204 on the timeline, back to Shu's apartment with Shu sleeping on the living room floor. He wakes up realizing he fell asleep watching a video and guesses Juro went home. He sees the tape was rewound, so it must have hit the end, but the dream he had just started at the end of the last one. He goes over to turn off the TV, and immediately the image of Miyuki pops up, stating that he saw the video. He starts to try to be surprised, but he says he can't be surprised by this anymore. She asks if he's still the same Shu, and he says he did see it, but doesn't understand the question. She tells him that everything he saw was real events in the distant past, and not just a video. He tells her he borrowed the video from Juro, but let's assume she's telling the truth. What is his part in this, and does he want Shu to see this stuff? Miyuki tells him that Shu and Juro are the same in watching the past unfold. He doesn't actually know that, but it's why he keeps coming over. He doesn't even know he's communicating with her. Shu asks if she really talked to Juro because it looked like they were just playing games and watching movies. Well, she said that's how it appears to him. And he brings up Ida, and she tells him that it's Ida's past he's seeing, and he resembles Shu greatly, and that his name is Tetsuya Ida. He asks now what happens since she's shown him all these crazy vision stuff, and she has to find out what he's thinking and intends to do. If Ida wants to reset the plan, he has to be stopped. Shu asks what the plan is and if it's some big evil scheme. She says it's not, and it's called Project Ark. It'll save humanity, and that as a species, they'll all be moved to another planet, and whether they know it or not, the plan revolves around all of them. We fade out to a to be continued. Okay. So let's see, we don't have any new cards on the field this time. But we have that many strings. Let's see. How many are going to adult Tetsuya? Just the two? Everything else is going somewhere else though. So let's get these two down here. We're gonna see a lot based on adult Juro Izumi here. So yeah, basically he copied Juro Izumi into an android and then tortured it. And then, oh, that's down here. Adult Tetsuya here wants to copy the AI Tomi Kisaragi into an actual Tomi Kisaragi. Let's see, so all four of these are now going to connect to our adult version of Juro Izumi. I'm going to regret this in the future. I just have a feeling. Let's see. Getting harder and harder to see here. Let's see, Juro, as an adult, knows how to interrupt the Deimos code down here. He figured out how to use the interlosser to download the memories. He did the most work on the buried UFO / supercomputer down there. And then, for survival's sake, he took over Tomi Kisaragi Android. Took over her body in Lab 6. Now I move this back into position. We continue on with the next video at 111 now. We're still with Shu. We're going to begin the chapter with Shu walking along the third floor hallway again. He makes the same remarks about the game, the shows, the dreams, and looks into Class 1B at the same result. This time, however, he sees Yuki walk in the direction of the cafeteria, so he decides to follow her to a fade out. We fade back into event 206 on the timeline, with Shu entering the cafeteria with Yuki standing by the register, Hey-C in hand. He approaches her and tells her he was thinking of her, and there she is. So, Destiny wants them to be together. Yuki asks what the hell he's talking about. He tries hitting on her by bringing up even more apple juice, and she shuts him down there too, but says she needs to cut down on the smoke, so that's her new focus. He tries to convince her to go on a motorcycle ride, and she says no. He tries directly asking for a date, and she also says no. He tries clarifying it's for one date, and she just sighs. He then asks if she has anywhere she wants to go, like someplace from her past with good memories, and then asks if there might be a reason she can't go back. She snaps at him that there isn't a reason, but she was thinking about her grandmother on her mom's side, who she hasn't seen since her parents' divorce. Shu pounces on this with a "you don't say," and she accuses him of setting her up. He then offers to take her, but she says her grandma's in Hamanashi, a whole prefecture over from where they are, so it's too far. Shu says he wants to go, as it's about 100 kilometers one way, and it's a perfect chance to check something. After what he heard on TV the night before, he had something he needs to check out personally. We fade out to a flashback, and to event 205 on the timeline. We fade in to Shu talking to Miyuki via TV set at night. She offers to tell him where he is, and he doesn't understand as he knows he's home. She tells him to think bigger and think about everything he knows, and this city that he's lived is an isolated enclosure just 30 kilometers in diameter. He questions this as there are still news reports from all over the world, so he doesn't buy that they're that closed off. She says that that's a reasonable reaction, so he should go see for himself. She unlocks a part of the Suwabuki bypass so he can see the truth, and she tells him to go to the edge of the world, to the outer walls of the city itself. She shuts down, and Shu tries to change the channel to bring her back to no avail. We fade out to return to the conversation to at least the last continuation, because, they skip past the rest of the conversation there. We fade in to see Yuki and Shu driving along the Suwabuki bypass, and Yuki wondering how she agreed to this. She asks Shu if he ever thinks anything through, and he says he can get them back in 2 hours, so home before sundown easy. He asks about her grandma, and she says it's the boondocks, nothing but rice paddies. She used to go there every summer, walking in the fields to go do radio gymnastics with everyone. Shu says he did the same thing in the countryside when he was a kid. Yuki continues that she got watermelon in the afternoons, then swim in the river and catch fish with bare hands, and then go catch cicadas off the old Zelkova tree with the hill behind the house. Shu says it's weird because his grandpa had a Zelkova on the hill behind his house where he used to catch cicadas too, and the river and watermelon also sound like things he remembers. She calls it normal, as just about everyone remembers the same stuff from the country vacations. He disagrees and says that's exactly what is weird about it. About this time, they drive into a tunnel, and Shu says they're about 15 kilometers from the middle of the city, and the tunnel should end around the prefecture line. However, before they exit the tunnel, it changes into a largely unfinished structure that's a little hard to actually describe. They get off the bike, and Yuki asks what the hell this place is. Shu runs further ahead and realizes that this is what Miyuki was talking about. Yuki looks around and says it doesn't look like a construction site, as it seems to go on forever above and below, and she can't even see the end. Yuki asks again where they are, and Shu calls it the outer walls. Yuki asks how they get through, and Shu doesn't even know if there is a way through, so what if all their memories from outside town are fake, and everyone is just convinced that an outside even exists? Neither of them believe it, but Shu especially, as it would mean this 30-kilometer of an enclosure of an isolated city is the only world they've ever known. They fade out, to be continued. Nope, no new cards or strings for that video, sadly. We move on to video 112, where we're back in battle. The second area, Shibagaki City, Battle 6. Once again, immediately after the events of the previous battle, it's now 10:31 p.m. on May 27th. We start with Iori complaining that the enemy just doesn't let up. Jiro asks if she's okay, as it seems kinda rough on her. She says she can keep going as everyone's doing their best. Jiro reminds her that use of support units, especially the Guardian, is important, as they can spike the enemy threat ID signal to fool them into thinking that they're high-value targets, so they're decoys that can basically pull aggro away from the Sentinels and Terminals. A pops up to say that the EMPs on the first gens can buy breathing room, but at the cost of drawing extra attention. Takatoshi says he couldn't ask for a better chance at glory, and battle starts. Once battle finishes, Yuki asks how long they have to keep everything up. Keitaro says if they could activate the Aegis faster, maybe it would mitigate some pilot exhaustion, but then asks, what do we actually know about the Aegis system? Rinya says Universal Control oversees the world through the terminals, but the terminals aren't responding when they fall under kaiju attack, so the mainframe would go down without noticing it was compromised. Keitaro asks if this means the system is paralyzed when it comes to the kaiju, and Rinya says, well, that's one way to put it, so Operation Aegis is about covering for that weakness. The Daimos open up vulnerabilities to attack the terminals, so the Sentinels exploit the same vulnerabilities with low-grade hacking to provoke the system's security and trigger defenses. The Aegis system then activates and locks out the kaiju. In effect, since the kaiju threat is too subtle for detection, the Sentinels present a bigger threat. Takatoshi says it's like sounding a fire alarm with no fire to get people bounding out of their bunks, and Keitaro says it sounds familiar, and asks if that's why he got called no-account rascal. Rinya finishes by saying that's one reason they can't activate until the Daimos are close enough to the terminals. Okay. So now we need ourselves one new card here. To actually put the word terminal on the field. Okay, and then 3 strings. I'm just going to go ahead and attach the first 2 of these. There we go. So let's see. Yeah. First, Deimos. And something that is slightly off screen, Universal Control, because Universal Control does not see the Deimos as a threat. Meanwhile, the Deimos will hack the terminal to attack everything. And the Sentinels... I know you're around here somewhere. There you are. The Sentinels will hack the terminal to set up defenses. I know, just a lot of hacking going on. We continue on with video 113, where we come back to Shu's story in the 3rd floor hallway again. Shu's mumbling about how he, Jiro, and Iori are dreaming about actual events from the past, and this place is isolated. He adds that he knows this because of the pop star Miyuki Inaba telling him this through his TV, and he has no idea who he can talk about this to because the truth will get him thrown in a loony bin. He looks into Class 1B, but this time there's no Tomi, and it would be awkward running into her anyway. Jiro walks out of the classroom, and Shu asks him if he's going home because he wants to talk about that video. Jiro apologizes, but says he's in a hurry. Jiro leaves, and Shu wonders if he figured something out too. Shu then looks in 1A for Yuki, and on not seeing her, says she's occupied because detention is a cruel mistress. He sighs and heads to the roof of the school for a fade out. We fade back into event 211, and Shu entering the school rooftop. Shu considers laying everything out in the open and going public, or recording Miyuki talking to him and sending that tape to TV stations, and then walks further down the roof to see Ninji. He asks Ninji what has him so spaced out, and Ninji just says he has shit on his mind, and counters by telling Shu that Shu looks like hell. Shu says he has something weighing him down. Ninji then sighs and asks if he remembers when Ninji skipped school for a few days, and Shu asks what about it. Ninji says he was stranded in the future, and Shu has a fairly non-committal response, telling him he needs to come up with a better excuse for ditching than that. Ninji says that's about what he figured, and then asks what's going on with Shu. Shu tells him that Miyuki has been showing up in his room every night, and he doesn't know what to do about it. Ninji complains, it's like, well, if you're going to make me feel stupid for even asking, and Shu says that's about what he figured. About now, Megumi shows up, and Shu says she called him to the roof to talk. Ninji complains of how hard it is to be Shu's friend before he leaves. From here, we have a repeat of the scene where Megumi shoots him with the gun, and he gets sucked into Sentinel 20. When it happens, though, we focus on him, and he gets a few moments where he spins confused, but then he recognizes the Sentinels, the robot he saw in his dreams, and is very surprised when it decides to take flight. We fade to black. We fade into Event 213, the timeline, to a rooftop on Gogyo Street where Tetsuya and the man in black watch the Sentinel take flight from a distance. The man in black called the launch point Yaimaki, I believe that's how you say it, which Tetsuya adds is kinda close to Sakura High School. He says there's no mistaking it as a Sentinel, telling the MIB to notify all agencies, ministries, and the US military, tell them no scrambles as Showa-era weapons won't do much against a Sentinel. They don't know who's in it or what their intent is, so they need to call in Ryoko. He looks back at the Sentinel and notices it's still ascending, and wonders what the hell it's trying to do. He also notices it looks to be the last aerial lightweight craft designed by Okino, and he wasn't aware it even entered production. He spends one last moment wondering who the pilot is as we fade to black. We fade back into Event 214 on the timeline to see pretty much a scene in space, with the Sentinels surrounded by a lot of green fog. Shu is kind of amazed he's in space because he knew it was going up, but he couldn't have gone that high. His altimeter, though, reached 2,078 meters, and Miyuki pops up over comms to tell him he bypassed the upper shield, so he's outside the enclosure. He asks that if he's outside the wall, is it all just space out there? He asks what it means, and notes that he saw a lot of these robots in his dreams, but they couldn't fly. Inaba says he's in Sentinel 20, and he's the operator. He asks if Megumi works for her, and she says the Sentinel was never meant to be transmitted. She says they found us, and by they, she means intruders from another district that left their origin point and came to his world. He asks what she means by another district, and if that means there are more than one of these places. She tells him they need to hide the Sentinel, and tells him she can't do anything from there and he needs to go back to his sector. He wonders how, as he kinda just has propellers and they don't work in space, and then everything starts to spin. The scene fades to black as he falls. We fade back in to Event 215 in the timeline, and we see Yuki watch the appearance of the Sentinel from Ayame Park. Shu teleports out of the Sentinel to right in front of her, and he, while exhausted, is happy to see her, because it means that's like he's been saying, and they are soulmates. It's good timing, as he was hoping to see her one last time before he died. She chides him for talking like that now, and asks if the Sentinel is his, to which it goes away in a flash. He says he's just glad he didn't crash somewhere with people. Yuki says he needs to tell her what happened when Tetsuya and Ryoko show up, and say they will take over now. Ida exclaims that out of all possible pilots, he never expected Shu. Tetsuya tells him they're government agents, and if he cooperates with them, he can guarantee the safety. If not, he'll be institutionalized. He tells Tetsuya that he really hates being talked down to, especially from guys like Ida. Yuki tells him to take it easy, and Shu is surprised she knows him. Ida tells him that Yuki is a member of their organization, and he was a part of her assignment to monitor pilots like Shu, and that's why she was transferred to Sakura. Shu's in disbelief and looks to Yuki in hopes that he's kidding. Yuki doesn't have an answer, and Ida suggests he cooperate for Yuki's sake, if nothing else. We fade to black to a to be continued. We return to video 114 as we jump back into Kitaro's story, and he's once again at the riverbed. And he notes that the lights here stay on at night, so they don't have to worry about keeping lanterns around. He thinks about BJ and wonders if the logs he saw are true, and how is he still alive 200 years in the future? He thinks about Rinya being the one that took Chihiro and maybe supplied Tamao her pills, as well as from being 80 years in the future. He thinks about the Sentinel and wonders how he could fight in the past even if he got it back there, as everyone he knew or cared about is gone. He finally decides to hunt Rinya down, and the scene fades to black. We fade back in to event 124 on the timeline to see Kitaro at the school's front gate. He starts to head toward the athletics building, but Natsuno runs on screen and almost into Kitaro. He tells her he's about to go looking for her, and she replies likewise, as she was worried about him. She says it was some rough stuff and can't imagine how he's feeling. He says he came there to find Rinya, but doesn't know what he looks like even, so he asks Natsuno if she could point him out. She says Rinya hasn't been on campus, and no teacher knows where he lives. Miwako walks on screen, and Natsuno asks her if she still has the picture of Rinya she took when he wasn't looking. She tells Natsuno not to be so loud about it, but eventually pulls out the picture. Kitaro looks at it, and Miwako then puts it away. He realizes the man he saw back at the park was Rinya, and sprints off towards Ayame Park, and we fade to black. We fade back in to event 125 on the timeline, to Kitaro walking up the stairs at the park, and he spots young Chihiro and approaches her. He asks if it really is her and begs her to say anything. She puts some distance between the two of them, and he reapproaches her with the little stuffed rabbit in hand and offers it to her, telling her he found it when it survived the air raid and he's been trying to give it to her. She blushes and recognizes him as her big brother. She takes it as he tells her not to lose it again, and Kitaro nearly breaks down in tears, having found his sister. Chihiro says it must be true, as it's not like her memories were displaced, and her dependency as his little sister is still part of her identity, and denial can cause enormous strain to one's psyche. Kitaro asks her, surprised by her more scientific and rigorous speech, if she's okay, and she says better than, as she has her original memories now, as she's Chihiro Muramura. Rinya walks on screen and remarks that she was the one that insisted on keeping that a secret, but she gave it away in the end. Kitaro sees red at seeing Rinya's face, much like I do most of the time, and Chihiro says that sometimes a bold change of plans is necessary, which Rinya should know better than anyone. Rinya is surprised to see Kitaro there, and he asks what the hell he did to Chihiro. Rinya doesn't appreciate the hostility, but this is Chihiro in her original state, and she wasn't his sister to begin with. Kitaro says he isn't going to listen to Rinya, and he will avenge Tamao. Rinya tells him he misunderstands the situation, and Kitaro kneels down to Chihiro and asks her to come with him. She asks where, and if it's 1945, no one's actually left there. In fact, it doesn't matter where they run, and if they want to prevent the loop, they have to gain control over all the systems. She tells him he was always dependable and was an excellent design engineer. He's confused, and she continues by quoting him saying, "I'll always be on your side, Chihiro," asking him again to cooperate. She turns to Rinya and asks if everything is ready. He replies it is, so she says she shouldn't waste any more time. She walks off and Kitaro starts to follow, but Rinya tells him not to bother. Kitaro says he's going with him, and Rinya tells him that Chihiro is being targeted for assassination, and he doesn't have the capacity to protect her. Kitaro asks who, and Rinya tells him it's A. So if Kitaro should decide to cooperate, let him know. Kitaro thinks about A and wonders if he got there by traveling through time to a fade out. We fade back into event 37 in the timeline to a flashback in 1944's old school building. We see Tamao and A on the floor. Kitaro walks in, and Tamao stands to greet him, and he tells her the military police are gone for now as they're searching for Kiriko. Tamao can't believe she's a spy, and Keitaro says they think she's associated with him and he dragged her into this. He doesn't understand why anyone would protect a wanted man. A says the woman they call Kiriko isn't Kiriko and she's not from this world. Keitaro calls him a lunatic, and A wonders what he wants with the Sentinel. Keitaro's surprised he knows of the Sentinel and calls him a spy. A says her escape would likely be by gate, and if they hurried, they could catch her. Tamao asks A if her parents are really her parents, and if she was brought here from the future. He asks if that's what Kiriko told her, and she doesn't know why Kiriko would lie, but it explains the dream she keeps having. A said Tamao's memories have been tampered with. Keitaro calls A insane and asks her not to listen to what he's saying, and they should just turn him in. She says she doesn't want it to come to that. A asks him if he's Keitaro as in Keitaro Miura, and tells him they've been fighting alongside each other. Keitaro says he's never seen him before, and A clarifies he means the Keitaro of the future, the one without a physical body and his consciousness stored inside a scout unit. Tamao says this means Keitaro is, and trails off, with A saying they are one and the same. Keitaro says he's had enough of the nonsense, and tells A he's taking him in. A sprints by them and levels a gun at their head, remarking that he's out of his mind with the poison coursing its way through the bodies they speak. The scene fades out, to be continued. Okay here. So, once again, we don't exactly have we do not exactly have new cards. We have a few strings, though. First things first, Rinya has had secret pictures taken of him by Miwako. Let's see, and Tamao. Saw you just a second ago. Has been having strange dreams along with a few other characters so far. A. Alright, you're around here somewhere. I know you are. There we go. Has Chihiro Morimura as an assassination target. Zoom in a bit. There's Tsukasa. Tsukasa Okino has apparently been telling Tamao about the future. Continuing on with video 115. We see Keitaro standing around the same riverbed as always. He still can't make any sense out of A's story and has trouble with the concept of being a part of BJ. He thinks about Chihiro and how he didn't understand what she was telling him about himself and wishes she could just return to the sister he knew. He decides he wants to hear Natsuno's voice and heads off to Sakura High School to look for her in a fade to black. We fade in to see Keitaro at the front gate, then he heads off to the athletics building in another fade out. We fade in to event 151 on the timeline to the athletics building, where Keitaro walks on screen. Several other kids are there as part of the various sports clubs, and Natsuno goes running by, asking herself what she can do. Keitaro stops her and asks what's wrong, and she tells him BJ is gone, probably lost somewhere alone, and if he's caught, they will never see him again. Keitaro recommends splitting up to look, and Natsuno says he couldn't have gotten too far, so maybe he's in a school building. He tells her she should search the buildings while he looks around the perimeter. She agrees, and they head out to a fade out. They fade back in at the school gate, and Keitaro sees some kids gathered around the area. He hears them talk about a flying RC thing that went back behind the North School building, and they wonder if it's part of the radio club. Keitaro recognizes that as a place where the old school building is, and heads off to check for a fade out. We fade back into Event 152, where Keitaro is walking along the passageway where he sees no sign of BJ, but he hears rotor blades after a brief moment. BJ appears and lands next to him, and Keitaro asks if he's trying to draw attention to himself, and that Natsuno is worried about him. BJ tells Keitaro that he's been scanning overhead for him, and Keitaro replies likewise. Keitaro asks BJ if a statement that BJ is him is true, and BJ confirms it. Keitaro says that nothing should surprise him anymore, but why does he look like that? BJ said that when the world was destroyed, he died. He then had to take Keitaro's place and fight in the Sentinel, so he was resurrected as an AI. Keitaro surmises the Sentinel he was using to fight the monsters is what he's looking for now, but how did this AI end up in a scout unit? BJ said there was a malfunction in the Sentinel, so he uploaded a part of himself to the drone, but 72% of him is still locked inside that Sentinel. Keitaro asks if Natsuno knows BJ is Keitaro, and he replies that they didn't get a chance to meet in the previous world, and he's very fond of Natsuno, so it's best she doesn't know. Keitaro asks him if he knows what's going to happen, as he is from the future, and BJ replies that his experiences are still all from the past. Keitaro is confused, and BJ replies that time is relative and time travel is impossible. Keitaro asks how, since BJ is Keitaro from the future. BJ says he's an entity that used to be Miura before Keitaro. BJ says he located the Sentinel and can access all logs, so Keitaro adds that the rest of the footage is available. BJ asks for a promise before the final invasion begins. Keitaro will research the logs and find a solution, adding that Operation Aegis will lead everyone down a path of destruction. Keitaro asks why he's looking for a promise, and BJ replies that he will be gone soon. We fade to black. We fade into Event 3 to 2188 to see Keitaro and Chihiro talking over communications. She asks if everything's going as planned, and he says all issues are resolved on his end, with 4 sectors ready for the final phase and the remaining sector at 70%. Chihiro questions the word sector, and he says the structures are similar to the colonies, so that's what he's been calling them. She says there will be 5 sectors then, and says they're divided by historical era instead of orbital position. He asks why they didn't create a district replicating the present day, and she says the decision was made to start over from before when the world took a terrible turn. He asks if she means the nanomachine incidents, and she says maybe humanity tasted the fruit of knowledge too early, but when it was being decided how far to go back, they couldn't agree, so they decided to prepare the districts by era. Keitaro says it works out for him, as he always wanted to live in the 20th century before the war, but, he adds, some of the resources of that era are old, so accurately reproducing them might be difficult, and he's not confident he can do it. She replies it's fine, as long as the civilization survives, she'll be happy. He tells her just one district will be the size of a city with 1.2 million people. She says that's more residential areas than originally planned, so Mrs. Karabe's hands are going to be full. He says he's sure everything will be finished on time, but he has to get back to work. Okay, so I believe... Nope, we've still got a few more. We're getting close to the end of this video. And there aren't going to be a whole lot more cards and strings from here on out. But we do have a few. Get the nanomachine incident there. And I have to yawn here. Well, let's see. Nanomachine incident is going to be the very central focus of the strings for this section. First, We have two people that share partial responsibility for the nanomachine incident here. I need to zoom in a little bit. Stay there. Thank you. First, Chihiro from the future. And Newman Inc. would have partial responsibility for the future. And then the events in Sector 1 happened after this era. Happened after the nanomachine incident. Which, that opens a few possibilities for us there. I don't know exactly, Get yawn again. Excuse me. I don't know exactly where I am in the timeline here. Anyway. Move things back to where they go. And we continue on with video 116. It's battle time again. We are still in the second area of Shibagaki City in Battle 7. Once again, immediately after the events of the previous battle, it's 10:49 p.m. on May 27th. Okino tells Takatoshi they have a problem. He just finished analyzing the decode's recent changes, and they've improved their missile weapons. Takatoshi takes that to mean the Sentinels have them rattled. Okino says they also have ground-piercing missiles on the field, so those units are probably going to be there to home in on the terminals. If we do not have air defense on the fields in response, this is going to get ugly. Takatoshi says he can be the decoy since flying bombs aren't enough to bring him down, and battle starts. After the battle ends, A says he never expected the enemy would have that many missile launchers. Juro says if the other waves are going to be that missile heavy, they need to improve the anti-air flares, and the 4th Jin has flare torpedoes for the task. Megami says she understands and she'll keep an eye on their missiles. Tomi asks if he's sure he's not Juro Izumi with all that knowledge, and he replies that he's sure, but he does know Izumi, so he knows what they're up against. And we're going to finish out this conspiracy vid with video 117. We see Ninji and Tomi on the train platform pretty much exactly like we saw them last time. He asks Tomi if she has some kind of key handy, and she replies she has the key to her house. He realizes that's not it, because even he's got house keys. He says they've got to do something as the kaiju are coming, and Tomi asks where. He says they'll show up after both of them board a train. She asks how he knows, and he says he saw it, but he doesn't know how to explain it. He knows they need to find a way out of the loop, and his only clue is the key. He thinks about the weird voice and how he doesn't even know where he was, only that it looked like an alien lab from a UFO show and he was butt naked. Tomi tells him he's acting weird and doesn't look so good, and he starts to walk around, eventually spotting Iori and Okino standing a ways down the platform. He stands on the side of those two, trying to figure out where he knows Okino from, and Tomi asks why he's being sneaky. Tomi sees the other two and asks Ninji if he's hiding from Iori. He says it's not like that, and Tomi tells him to tell her he doesn't like Iori. He protests that it really isn't like that and sees Juro walk up to the platform. Tomi reminds him she's still talking to him and he needs to give her a real answer. He protests again, it really isn't like that, so she asks exactly what it is like. He asks why she's getting so worked up, as they aren't exactly boyfriend and girlfriend. She says it isn't a big deal, and she's just curious. On a side note, can somebody just tell them to kiss already? Thank you. Tomi then goes over and talks to Iori and Okino. She asks where Iori's going, since her house is the other way. Iori says she has a thing to do in Tsutsuji, but the train comes and those two board it before she can finish, so Ninji follows them to a fade out. We fade into event 173, and to the interior of the Tsutsuji-bound train. We've got young Chihiro standing in the middle of the car and interrupts Ninji as he starts to look for the two of them to ask, and she asks if he's looking for somebody. He asks her if she saw a couple of school kids about his age, and Chihiro morphs into Iori, asking about school kids. Ninji has a minor freakout, wondering if that was magic, but then corrects the thought. He tells her he knows that, as a guy that just chased her onto the train, this does seem kinda sketchy, but he needs to know if she has a key on her, clarifying he doesn't mean a regular key, but a special key that he can't describe. He admits it sounds weird, and she runs further down the train car. He follows and asks her to wait, and she wants to know why he's looking for something like that. He says it's a really good question and he doesn't know how to explain it. Iori then turns in first into Nurse Chihiro, then Katsu Chihiro, then points a magical gun at him, telling him he's the original carrier of the key he's looking for. He is thoroughly confused and says he remembers her and the League of Darkness, which makes her one of the bad guys. She tells him this will only hurt for a moment, and she shoots him, making it fade to black. We fade into Event 18 to see a 7-year-old Ninji swinging a baseball bat around on an empty lot. Chihiro in a catsuit walks up to him and asks him if he should be playing alone this late at night, to which he replies he's training. She calls his name and offers to walk him back to his house, and he calls her Fishy as she talks like the League of Darkness people from the Common Hero TV show when they kidnap kids. She says she thinks he's the real bad guy since he's going to call a bunch of monsters here in 8 years that will destroy the world. He argues he'd never turned the side of evil, and she says he'll do it regardless of being good or evil. He says she can't trick him as he runs away, and she pulls out the magic gun, fires a couple of shots in his direction, but misses. She chases, and we have a fade out and immediate fade in to see Ninji run back into the same area, scared and out of breath. He says he basically did a lap around the block, but he doesn't know what he'll do as she had a gun and tried to shoot him. Chihiro manages to walk up behind him and level the gun at him, telling him not to move. He asks if he's going to die, and she says it'll only hurt for a moment right before she shoots him. She tells him she implanted him with some nanomachines that'll add to the program inside of him. Not a huge change, but they'll need it to fight back, so they can now prepare their weapons, the Sentinels. We fade out. We fade in again to Event 174 to find Ninji sitting against a space background, remarking about the sting and wondering if he just got shot. A scrambled window pops up and asks if he got the key. He still doesn't know what's going on there, but getting shot jogged his memory as he was shot by her when he was a kid too. The voice asks what he meant by he got shot and needs an explanation. Ninji says he was on the train and the school nurse shot him, even with the other passengers around. He then recognizes that it was definitely a grown-up Iori. The voice asks him to slow down because he's talking about trains, so it asks where this is happening. Ninji says it's where the voice keeps sending him, the train platform, and this happened when he chased Iori onto her train. The voice has to clarify what he's looking for why that he's looking for the key on a train platform, and he says yeah, and then asks why the voice doesn't know where it keeps sending him back to. The voice accepts this and surmises that the person with the key must be somewhere around there, so he needs to keep looking. The second window closes as Ninji screams out, "When do I get the explanation?" And we fade out. To be continued. Poor Ninji. And I only have the vaguest hint of an idea of what's going on with him there. How do I do that? I don't know. I don't know. I didn't hit the button this time. There's no cat. Like it just decided to refresh on me. Huh? I mean, we didn't lose any information, so I don't care. As long as I don't have to redo things, which means I would have to figure out exactly what everything was. So now we've got League of Darkness. I doubt it's going to be super important, but I'm still putting it in there. And we have the train platform. And have an itch on my arm. Okay, so let's see. The decode key. Apparently, even though he doesn't know it, he was the original carrier of the decode key he's looking for. But he's not now. And what exactly is the decode key? I do not know. And let's see, good old catsuit hero down here. Which I'm sure there are going to be things later that I will probably have to upgrade. I will have to update some of these things. But young Ninja calls her the League of Darkness. Current owner of the decode key is somewhere around there. So there we go. That's our updates to our Wheel of Misfortune and Misery. And me being thoroughly confused by a few things that happened in this session. I'll have to give them some thought. But anyway, that's for later. That's for me to do off camera. So, until next time, keep your tinfoil layered. At least 3 layers. It helps. Gotta block out the 5G signals and the RFID. That's what we're blocking out, right? Something like that. That's the mind control frequencies. Just checking. Regardless of whatever it is, take care, everyone. We will be back with more of this in a few videos. Later, everyone.